Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Dee Laugesen, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger China. We appreciate your interest in our weekly webinars in which we expose and analyze the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against America and the help being provided to the CCP in waging that warfare by captured U.S. elites. We encourage you to visit presentdangerchina.org for information on new programs, access to videos of our past webinars, and tons of other valuable content. Our moderator today is Frank Gaffney. Frank is the Vice Chair for the Committee on the Present Danger China and co-author of the book, The Indictment, Prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and Friends for Crimes Against America, China, and the World.
Welcome, everyone, to this supremely important edition of our webinar series sponsored by the Committee on the Present Danger China. It is as timely as it can be. It is as, I think, important as a topic can be. And it is hopefully as informative as it needs to be to assure that voters in America are equipped to make informed decisions about the choice before us. It will take place ultimately on Tuesday of next week, though voting has been taking place across the country for some time now. We hope that it will end and that the results will be known shortly thereafter on Tuesday evening, the 5th of November. The reason this is an especially important program is because we have not seen as much conversation, let alone serious, engaged debate about the threat the United States, its people, its society, its form of government, and its allies face from the Chinese Communist Party. We chronically refer to it by its acronym, the CCP. There were no questions asked in the course of either of the presidential debates, for example, about China. And there has been very little interest expressed by the media and by those who are part of the commentariat about what is stunningly the quite possible imminent prospect of not just the unrestricted warfare China has waged against us for decades, not just the people's war, the whole of society war that China has waged against us for the past 5 years at least, but a shooting war that might well involve our own territory and communities and lives, as well as those of our men and women in uniform serving overseas. So it seemed to us that it was absolutely imperative that a program be advanced in this window, this narrow and closing window, whereby the public, and most especially the legal registered voters of America, could be equipped to understand this threat and what it could mean for them, and thereby to have a basis upon which to make informed decisions about which policies, which candidates to favor with their votes. Let me emphasize, and we will do so throughout the program, I'm sure, this is not an effort to tell you how to vote. Individual participants, like all of us, I think, have our preferences and may actually admit to them. But we've asked all of them to recognize that this is meant to be a non-partisan effort to just bring to light factual information without fear or favor, without partisanship, for the purposes, as I say, of ensuring that what the framers of our Constitution felt was absolutely indispensable to the functioning of a republic like ours, namely that voters not only be engaged in decisions as to who will represent them, but that they be informed, that they be knowledgeable, and that they thereby are better able to act as they vote responsibly. So with that in mind, we have assembled what I consider to be an all-star cast of our Committee on the Present Danger China team and some of our important allies. We're going to begin today's program with Colonel John Mills, United States Army retired, a man who is well known to this audience. He's featured in many of these programs. We're always grateful to him for his time as well as his expertise. He is the author, among other things, of The Nation Will Follow and War Against the Deep State. He has been an indispensable contributor to the committee's work over the 5 years he's been involved as a founding member. And he has been asked to address the topic of the nature of the CCP, the warfare that I've mentioned against us to date, and why it matters in election 2024. Colonel, thank you for being with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Frank. Always an honor to be with you and Brian and all the other members of the committee, as well as our viewing audience. Thank you very much. To address this topic, I think there's two basic things I'd like to address and cover. First of all is the U.S. government's effort to counter foreign influence operations in U.S. elections. Very disappointed with that, and we're going to go over this. Second is a Supreme Court ruling on Virginia, my state, which also is very telling. Why did it even get to this level? And why did we have 3 Supreme Court justices vote against this? In the end, Virginia and Governor Youngkin prevailed. Again, not partisan. This is procedural in the conduct of election. But let's talk about the Director of National Intelligence first, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. As a journalist, I've been invited to attend a series of meetings given by the ODNI and the government team, including the FBI, Department of Justice, State Department, Department of Homeland Security. It kind of begs the question of what are we getting for $100 billion per year? And that is, I double checked the numbers on our spend on intelligence. It's over $100 billion per year. You'd think we would be getting our top people and our top thought on these matters. This was supposed to be a task force on foreign interference in the election. Kind of scratch your head, because they essentially dismiss any Chinese involvement. There's a tyranny of the narrative that has just crushed any kind of red teaming or rethinking or team being of the narrative. That's what we expect for $100 billion a year and our top people. But they just blow by. 95% of the oxygen during these meetings has been consumed with the legacy media, except for me, is Russia, 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 with no evidence. China is almost disregarded, and they decline to even respond to questions about China's involvement. China has just hacked President Trump's phone and Vance's, and I think the Harris campaign too. That sounds to me like, and they did that. That was publicly announced 2 days after the most recent meeting, in which the DNI and the government task force said no Chinese interference directly. So I thought that was shameful. You have this group that may actually be being paid by the U.S. government. It's a UK group, Countering Digital Hate, which has been noodling with the election. Sounds like foreign election interference to me, but for some reason this is just ignored, and they won't even respond to these questions. Also, what about TikTok? won't even respond to that question. Iran is identified as, yes, actively trying to interfere in the conduct of elections, the networks of the elections. By the U.S. government's own reporting, Iran is acting and would not exist if it wasn't for Chinese funding and support. So Iran is a proxy of China, ergo, China is interfering in the elections. So the lack of a trusted ballot, it's just all kinds of things. It's very disappointing. So we just need to be vigilant because clearly there is a number of elements of foreign interference led by China that are essentially being dismissed and not even looked at. Shameful. For $100 billion a year, we need to be getting our top work. We need to be getting the cream of the cream and our top people and not a captured narrative. Because remember, a captured elite leads to a captured government. Apparently, that appears to be what's going on. But let's talk about the Supreme Court ruling. This is the Virginia case. It's all about 18 U.S. Code 611. Must be a U.S. citizen to vote. For years, the election community has always used 1993 motor voter law and this 90-day quiet period saying you can't remove anybody from the rolls. Well, Virginia went to the Supreme Court and 6 out of the 9 justices says that's right. There is no, the 90-day quiet period of 1993 motor voter doesn't apply if you were not a U.S. citizen. And the basic question is, how does a non-U.S. citizen even get on the rolls in the first place? Sounds like foreign interference. And again, that's something I asked about with the U.S. government's Foreign Interference Task Force, and they wouldn't even respond to that question. So huge Supreme Court ruling, huge Supreme ruling on you can't be a foreign national and vote in a U.S. election. And yes, you can be removed. You have no right as a foreign citizen to be on the rolls. It's a federal law, 18 U.S. Code 611. Good decision by the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, we still had 3 out of the 9 justices not agreeing with that and saying essentially you can keep foreign nationals on the voting rolls. So there is a pervasive foreign interference led by China in our elections. And so be vigilant because citizens at the local level can have a big influence and part on this.
Colonel, thank you very much. I appreciate your tying in that important Supreme Court decision. It's part of the backdrop, of course, of this election and questions about election integrity that has to be top of mind. By the way, folks, we did a full webinar on that subject last week, and I commend to you it, as well as if you're seeing this video after the fact, the Committee on the Present Danger China's webinar site as a place to subscribe so you don't miss any of them going forward. presentdangerchina.org. We're going to hear next from a woman who personally experienced a phenomenon that she is now warning is taking place inside America. It is part of, again, the context for our conversation today, in part because it bears directly on why so little is being said about what's happening with respect to the burgeoning threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. Her name is Xi Van Fleet. She came to prominence warning the Loudoun County School Board about the kind of indoctrination it was subjecting students to. She has published recently a very important book entitled Mao's America, a Survivor's Warning. She also appeared on stage on the program that Turning Point USA and President Trump did in Georgia back on the 23rd of May. And if anybody has the video of her remarks, Xi and we would be very pleased if you might share them with us, because they seem not to have been made available as they should be because of the importance of her warning. She does a short reprise of it for us by a videotape. We're very grateful for taking the time to do so. Let's go to that videotape now.
I think a lot of people are aware that we're in some kind of a cultural war, but too many have no idea. This is a Marxist Cultural Revolution. Why I say that? Because I lived through one before, 50 years ago in China. That was Mao's Cultural Revolution. And the goal of that revolution is to overthrow the system, the civilization of China, so that he can implement his own ideology, Maoism, the most radical version of Marxism. So what happened in the Cultural Revolution? He mobilized the indoctrinated youth called Red Guards and set them out to destroy the civilization of China by destroying anything old. And he called it 4 O's: old ideas, old tradition, old habit, and old custom. And they destroy statues. They change names of streets, institutions, even their personal names to be politically correct. The entire Chinese population was divided into two: the allies of the revolution and the enemy of the revolution. And who are the enemies of the revolution? The party decide. Yeah, if they don't like your idea and they don't like your view, you become the enemy. And you deserve not only condemnation, but violence. The whole Cultural Revolution destroyed everything, destroyed family, and turned everyone against each other. I saw friends against friends, neighbors against neighbors, co-workers against co-workers, and children against parents. And at the end of the Cultural Revolution, 20 million people perished, and the civilization was wiped out, and the economy was in ruins, and China plunged into absolutely the darkness. I've been there. Now I see the similar thing happen here. That's why I'm so passionate to warn Americans, especially this election. We have a choice to make. Are we going to take the same path that China did and go to the destruction and death, or are we going to turn everything around? And I'll call it, let's restore America Republic. And let's bring back the values and the tradition that make this country great. And then let's unite rather than divide. Let's preserve our family. And I hope everyone keep that in mind when they go to vote. We really have a choice, and we need to keep America, for not just for us, but for our children and our children's children. That is the freedom. We need to absolutely preserve it. We don't want to be the one to have it slip through our fingers.
Xi Van Fleet, thank you very much. A powerful message, a critically important time, as we've been talking about. We have a last-minute addition to the lineup. I want to make sure he appreciates that the topic of this particular program is not the one we talked about earlier. We are talking about the election. Jeff Nyquist, better known as J.R. Nyquist, the handle of his blog, I commend it to all of you. And Jeff, I thought we might adjust to take advantage of your expertise by asking you to speak to a proposition that is, I think, top of mind for many of us in this Committee on the Present Danger of China, namely the prospect of an imminent shooting war with the Chinese Communist Party. If you might say a few words about that, we'll go to you right now.
The big problem, of course, with Chinese men of military age crossing our border and infiltrating Mexico, Latin America, and being inside Canada. When I went to Canada to this seminar last month, I was shocked at how many Chinese faces I saw on the streets of Toronto, and I was informed that the population of Canada had greatly increased. I always knew it was something a little over 30 million people. It's getting close to 40 million. And a lot of those, there's people from India, of course, but many are from China. And the Chinese have moved into Canada in a big way. And I will remind people of the Sidewinder report, which came out in 1997, which was a joint study of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Canadian Intelligence Service, that China was infiltrating Canada in the 1990s using triads, using organized crime, money laundering through urban real estate deals, and bribing politicians. And I had dinner with a Canadian former MP who had just lost her seat. And she shocked me by telling me that they had closed 31 polling stations in her district. She was a conservative Canadian member of parliament. And they opened 9 that were entirely manned by Chinese nationals who had migrated to Canada, who were counting the votes by hand. And she told me she could not find enough poll watchers to watch how they were counting the votes. And she had won her seat a number of times, and then they're counting the votes. They closed the polling stations so they could only have these Chinese nationals count her vote. She said she called for an investigation of how this could happen. She believed she was targeted. And she said, you have to tell your American friends Canada has been infiltrated and taken over by China, and the Trudeau family is a Chinese communist family. And this was rather shocking. And of course, I remembered what the Sidewinder report had said, that they wanted to capture and use Canada as a way of attacking America in the flank. And this is a very frightening prospect, Frank. And I don't think we're taking it serious enough.
This is a subject we're going to return to in a future webinar, Jeff, and your introduction to the team in Canada that put together this study of our panel discussion up there at the Mackenzie Institute. The threat from the north, Russia and China as well, is a critically important topic as well. What I think you touched on there at the beginning is certainly part of what we're focused on today, namely the presence, not just across the border, but inside our country, of large numbers, it appears, of PLA, People's Liberation Army personnel, who, if given the mission, and presumably they have been given the mission of attacking us from within, will cause us incalculable harm. So if you could stick around, we'll talk about this more with you in a few minutes. We are going to turn next to one of the great political analysts and practitioners of our time, and I'm also very proud to say is one of our Committee on the Present Danger China members. His name is George Racely. He is a veteran of some 300 political campaigns, from those for the presidency on down. He has been involved in both congressional roles as a staff member, as well as in the executive branch, including serving for the Vice President of the United States. He, these days, is the editor-in-chief of a terrific online resource, Richard Viguery's newsletter, Conservative HQ. And we've asked George to give us a readout on what it means that something as important as this topic, the fact that there is this threat from China, that it may no longer be confined to the sort of pre-kinetic kinds of attacks upon us, but including perhaps a shooting war, and the fact that it's not been addressed meaningfully, directly, and in a sort of sustained way in the course of this campaign to date. George Racely, welcome. It's good to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank. I think this is one of the most dangerous times for our country that we've seen in many, many years, potentially since perhaps the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's important to understand that the present administration has been deeply penetrated and compromised by our enemies. The Red Chinese certainly hope that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, because of their relationships with those two candidates, will be elected. If they are not, then the period that one might call the interregnum between Election Day and Inauguration Day will be very, very dangerous for the United States and for Taiwan. The Red Chinese, have been practicing the things that they would need to do to invade Taiwan. They've practiced a blockade of the island province. They've practiced assaults on it via bombers and missiles. So there is a great expectation that they are prepared to invade Taiwan. And the time between Election Day and Inauguration Day will be very, very dangerous and will be an invitation to the Red Chinese to do whatever they're going to do. Keep in mind that right now we have a very weak, intellectually debilitated president. It's not unreasonable to say that he's not really in control. If he becomes further debilitated, that would make Kamala Harris the de facto president, because there's no one else in the chain of command between now and the inauguration of the next president. So if Harris and Walz lose, there's effectively going to be a brief Kamala Harris administration. And it's important to recognize also the influence that Tim Walz has in this process. I think you'd have to go back to the FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration, and the Yalta Conference, where Alger Hiss, a Russian agent, was an intimate advisor to the president, to find someone who's so deeply committed to the other side as Tim Walz is to the communist Chinese. And his influence in a Harris administration would be disastrous. Harris has got her own set of Marxist influencers, and some of whom are deeply tied to communist China, or as I prefer to say, Red China, because we have to understand that their communist revolution is not something that stops at the borders of any one country. And the Chinese are committed to spreading their brand of Marxism around the world, just as our other enemies, the Islamists, are committed to spreading their brand of Islam around the world. And so I see this time between Election Day and Inauguration Day as very, very dangerous. The weakness of the present administration invites communist Chinese action. What could that action be? Well, I've already touched on the invasion of Taiwan, or as I prefer to call it, the extinction of the legitimate government of China. But we also have a very dangerous situation here, which others have alluded to. The penetration of our country by military-aged Chinese males has reached alarming proportions. I did an article about a year ago, I think, in which we calculated that as many as 2 divisions of the People's Liberation Army special operators could be here. And there's been evidence, for example, of clandestine biological weapons labs. One in California was discovered quite by accident. Well, imagine if those labs are set up as nodes around the country where these Chinese special operators can go pick up their biological weapons and distribute them to key facilities around our nation. And the Biden administration was derelict in their follow-up to this lab. It was suddenly just sort of disappeared and left to the local authorities to clean up the mess there, with no indication whatsoever that the federal government had any interest in exactly why this facility was located where it was, how it came into being, who was behind it. as far as I've been able to tell, no effort whatsoever to bring to court or to investigate or interrogate the communist Chinese operators who were behind it. So we have two areas of concern. One is what could happen in Taiwan or to Taiwan. And the second is what could happen here during this period of weakness where a debilitated president is on the way out. A thoroughly incompetent vice president may be at the top of the chain of command, and her closest advisor, what I consider to be thoroughly compromised communist Chinese agent, Tim Walz. So those are the things that I think could bring us into from this current situation that we have, where we're in a non-kinetic war, although if you're on the receiving end of Iran's rockets and missiles, you might think of it as a kinetic war. And those rockets and missiles rely in some degree on Chinese technology. So we're in a very dangerous time for the next several months. And I think that our government is, under the present administration, inadequately prepared to deal with it. And so I'm going to kick it back to you, Frank.
George Racely, thank you very much. As it happens, we're going to get into more detail on several of the points that you've raised, and I appreciate you sort of setting the stage for those conversations. We're going to begin with Trevor Loudon, a review of each of the four principal candidates, two for president, two for vice president, Democrat and Republican. Speaking first will be Trevor Loudon, again, man well known to this audience, a very important and frequent contributor to these programs, for which we are incredibly grateful. Trevor is going to talk about Kamala Harris. It's the subject of a new book by him, as a matter of fact, Kamala Harris's Communist Roots. We've asked him to address, as I hope will each of our next three presenters, her record, her platform, what we know about her staff, and prospective policies towards the Chinese Communist Party. And again, for the purposes of level setting, we are providing, as Trevor always does, a wealth of factual information that is intended to provide voters of any political stripe information they need to know to make informed decisions. Trevor, welcome back. It's great to have you with us. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Frank, and thanks to the viewers. I regard Kamala Harris as much of a communist as Fidel Castro or Hugo Chavez. She is deeply committed to that philosophy. She was raised in that philosophy. Most young Americans, if they turn communist, it's during college. They get indoctrinated. Her, it was in the cradle. Both of her parents were Maoists, well, communists. Her father, Don Harris, was a Jamaican Marxist, an openly Marxist professor at Stanford University. Her mother, Shyamala Gopalan, came from an Indian revolutionary family. Her grandfather was involved with African Marxists in Zambia also at one point. And Shyamala helped contribute to the famous book, Black Marxism. Both of them were members of the Afro-American Association in Stanford University in the early 60s, which openly supported Ho Chi Minh, Mao Zedong, and Fidel Castro, and spawned the Black Panther movement, which was, despite the propaganda, not a black nationalist group, but a pro-North Korean, pro-Chinese Maoist organization who sent regular delegations behind the bamboo curtain and worshipped at the feet of Chairman Mao and promoted his little red book. So Kamala, while your kids were going to Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, she was going to the Rainbow Sign, a radical communist social club in Oakland, which helped to promote the career of a certain Ron Dellums, who some of you may remember, who was held a key position as a Democrat in the Armed Services Committee for many, many years, while acting as an agent for both Cuba and the communist government of Grenada until Ronald Reagan thankfully took that regime down in 1983. She was involved in a radical economics club at Howard University, named after a famous Marxist economist. She had a well-publicized affair with Willie Brown when she came back to San Francisco to complete her law degree. Willie Brown was at the time running for mayor of San Francisco. He'd been the Speaker of the California Assembly for many, many years, one of the most influential politicians in the state. But Willie Brown was first elected with the help of the W.E. Du Bois Club, the youth wing of the Communist Party USA. He used to work very closely in communist causes in the Bay Area through the 60s. One of his closest comrades was a young woman called Diane Goldman, who you may know as the late Senator Dianne Feinstein. Willie Brown was involved supporting the Communist Party till at least 2002, several years after his affair with Kamala Harris. And he and Dianne Feinstein basically became China's biggest advisors, biggest enablers in the Bay Area. As we know, Dianne Feinstein helped to get China into the World Trade Organization. She used to visit Shanghai and stay at the home of the mayor, Hu Jintao, who later became the premier of China. And her and Willie Brown, together with the late Rose Pak, were really China's best friends in the Bay Area. And this is how Kamala got introduced to politics. She was through the Willie Brown connection. Another big supporter, has been for years, is a man called Steve Phillips. Now, Steve Phillips was part of Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition in the 1980s. And the Rainbow Coalition was run by pro-Chinese Maoists of the League of Revolutionary Struggle, the Communist Workers' Party, the Line of March, and the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. It was a Maoist operation, and the Rainbow Coalition idea was you get the white progressives together with the progressives of color, and this is their terminology. You get the brown progressives were the Latinos, the blacks were the blacks, the yellow stripe was the Asian Americans, the red stripe was the Native Americans, the lavender stripe was the gay Americans, etc. And that Rainbow Coalition was really a Chinese operation to start infiltrating the Democratic Party in a major way. A lot of the Maoist groups at that time left their jobs in factories and started working in non-profits, the legal profession, business, Hollywood, and particularly inside the Democratic Party. That's when it started, the mid-80s. Steve Phillips, in 2005, hooked up with George Soros and Tom Steyer and several others to form a left-wing billionaires alliance, the Democracy Alliance, which has put billions of dollars into progressive causes. Steve Phillips married into the Sandler family of San Francisco, the Golden West Savings and Loan fortune, and they got $2 billion selling their business to Wachovia, which they put into the progressive movement. They started ProPublica, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the Center for American Progress, etc. Steve Phillips also had a board group called Power Pack, which promoted the careers of their board member, Stacey Abrams, who thinks she's the governor of Georgia, Andrew Gillum, who almost became the governor of Florida, all on the Rainbow Coalition. That was their Maoist strategy. Steve Phillips also funded Barack Obama. His wife was his first major donor, and Steve Phillips got $10 million together in 2008 to do mass voter registration drives in 17 southern states. And that is what got Barack Obama ahead of Hillary Clinton in the 2008 primary. So Steve Phillips and his wife funded Kamala Harris in her DA run from San Francisco. Steve Phillips was a student Maoist with Kamala Harris's sister at Stanford. He knew the whole family. He says nobody knows Kamala Harris like we do. He funded her run for Attorney General of California, funded her run for U.S. Senate for California, and is now backing her presidential run. She is completely the protege of this very wealthy Maoist named Steve Phillips, and is backed at every step of the way by the Maoist networks on the ground around Black Lives Matter and the network of voter registration organizations that the Chinese have, basically supported by the Chinese consulate in San Francisco. In Arizona, they have Lucha. In Georgia, they have the New Georgia Project. In Pennsylvania, they have Pennsylvania Stands Up. In Michigan, they have Detroit Action. In Wisconsin, they have Black leaders organizing communities. So Kamala Harris is a Maoist, 100% Maoist. Even her slogans, the joyful campaign, is because Chairman Mao's words brought joy to the people. This is a Maoist word. When we fight, we win is directly from the Maoist movement. We are not going back is directly from the Communist Party USA. You know, this is all dog whistling to her radical base. And so she is backed by the left-wing billionaires of the Democracy Alliance and the grassroots communists who operate Black Lives Matter. They operate these network of voter registration organizations and claim credit for winning the race for Biden-Harris in 2020, openly claim credit for this. So yes, Kamala Harris is the stealth candidate. And if she is elected, I believe she will legalize 40 million illegal immigrants and turn them into citizens. So her party will have a monopoly on power going forward. She will abolish the Electoral College. She will stack the Supreme Court with at least 4 more left-wing Marxist judges, so that will be denied to conservatives. She will use the organs of the state to go after her enemies, and I believe she'll flood the Midwest and the US military with hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants. So the US military is completely compromised and can, if necessary, be used against the people of America. So Kamala Harris is a revolutionary Marxist backed by pro-Chinese radicals. She has been their puppet since she was born. She has always been their person. So I think that's enough.
You've laid this out very handsomely. We're going to turn next to a review of Donald Trump's record, his platform, his staff, to the extent that we can assess that, and the prospective policies towards China. And we've asked our colleague, the chairman of our Committee on the Present Danger China, Brian Kennedy, the former president of the Claremont Institute, now with the American Strategy Group, to lead that part of the program. Brian, welcome back. It's good to have you as always.
Thank you. And let me just reiterate, this is a nonpartisan review of the candidates. I'm guessing Trevor Loudon is not going to endorse Kamala Harris as president, but no one would be surprised by that. Most people will know that I am a supporter of President Trump, but I say all this simply as a private citizen and someone who is offering analysis of everything that's going on here. So when it comes to President Trump, I think his platform is pretty well known. We're going to close the border and deport the people who've come here illegally over the last 4 years. If there's been a hallmark of what President Trump has stood for, it's been that you're not really a country if you don't have a border. That seems obvious, but it really does get to the heart of his ideology, if he has one, which is common sense. It's not really an ideology. It really is just the ability to think through practically what's going on. If something works, he's for it. If something doesn't work, he's against it. And so I think that is going to be the hallmark of what he's done, what he did do the first 4 years, and really what he would do the next 4 years. The second, obviously, we all know, is drill, baby, drill, the whole question of energy dominance. He thinks it's a great tax upon the American people to have to export all of our oil from abroad. It costs more, and it doesn't put money in the pockets of the American people. Again, straight common sense. He wants to rebuild U.S. manufacturing. Again, commonsensical. He thinks any society should have the ability to produce its own goods, such as fighter aircraft, cars, electric power plants, transformers, the kind of backbone of the U.S. economy that should exist, and which we don't currently have entirely today. He wants to rebuild the U.S. military. Again, during his 4 years as president, he really did go a long way towards finding those things within the military that were a waste of money. He did not accomplish all he wanted to do when it came to cutting wasteful programs, but he has said in these next 4 years, if he is elected, he's going to pursue that aggressively, and then rebuild the American military in ways that would be conducive to a strong national defense and a robust deterrence, which today, unfortunately, it appears we don't have. Now, this is the Committee on the Present Danger China. What would he do with China specifically? Well, one reason we're in the crisis we're in today is because President Trump made, in his first administration, the good trade deals with communist China a priority, and stopping the theft of American intellectual property. Now, the Biden administration has kept many of those tariffs that the Trump administration put in place, and they've kept them because they were working. That tariffs are a method of encouraging U.S. manufacturing in the minds of President Trump especially. And so striking better trade deals with communist China so that we would have access to their markets and that we could use tariffs to protect American industries would be a priority. Then there's the entire stopping of the theft of American intellectual property. During the Trump administration, he said it was roughly $600 billion a year had been occurring over the last 10 years. And so President Trump thought there's $6 trillion of American wealth that's been stolen. That's going to stop. It was after he mentioned this and made it an aggressive part of his administration that the communist Chinese declared a people's war against the United States. And we've been living through that and describing that on these webinars of the Committee on the Present Danger China for the past 5 years. I think when we think of what Trump would do with China more broadly, there's, again, common sense things. They shouldn't be able to buy up U.S. farmland. They shouldn't be able to buy up especially farmland near American air bases. If there are communist Chinese drones swarming U.S. air bases or balloons flying over the country, that's going to stop on day one. Again, just straight common sense. Let me conclude the sort of the China piece here, and then turn it back over to you, Frank, with the whole question of Taiwan. The president has made a priority to get out of endless wars, not to start new wars, and to have peace and prosperity, not merely in the United States, but globally. And so it's a more sensitive topic, I think, when it comes to Taiwan. He believes in a robust deterrence, and that will require a strong U.S. national defense, more than we have today. And when it comes to Taiwan, I think the president will be supportive of selling them all the armaments that they have already purchased from the United States, but we haven't fulfilled yet, contracts we haven't fulfilled yet. But I think the best thing that the United States could do vis-a-vis Taiwan and the world is for us to have a robust national missile defense. It is part of the president's platform, and it was also part of his speech just the other night. The need for a national missile defense would mean that the United States could not be blackmailed with nuclear blackmail from stopping a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. A strong America will be a deterrent to a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And so if there's a single thing we can do to help the Taiwanese people, is to rebuild the American capacity to deter communist China. And that's something President Trump is committed to. And I believe if he is elected, and we have no idea who's going to win this, but if he is elected, he's going to carry that out. Again, a common sense platform that is, I think, by and large, pretty well known to the American people. So thank you, Frank. I'll turn it back over to you.
Brian, thank you for that very comprehensive treatment of the record as established in the first term and what might come in a second Trump term. I want to welcome back to these programs another of our rock stars at the Committee on the Present Danger China, Charles Sam Faddis. We've asked him to pick up on some of the points that you were hearing from George Racely about Tim Walz. He has written about him and his record and his policy approach, proclivities, on his platform and magazine.substack.com. I very, very highly commend this particular online resource to you. It is invaluable in terms of drawing on Sam's background in undercover operations for the Central Intelligence Agency and in the U.S. Army, and in the law enforcement space as a deputy attorney general out in Washington State. He's been a congressional candidate and author and so much more. But he's a great friend of the committee and one of its very, very valuable members. We have him, as we often do, by a video tape. This is a segment of an interview that I did with him this morning for our program, which you saw on the screen at the beginning of the show, Securing America. He has graciously allowed us to make a twofer of it by presenting it to you here, a sneak preview on this evening's program. Let's go to the videotape with Sam Faddis, please.
Tim Walz, or the Great Walz of China, as I call him. This is nonpartisan in the sense that, look, we're worried about the national security of the United States. That doesn't really make any difference whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or despise both of them or a Green Party member. We ought to all be able to agree that that's kind of a big thing, like maintaining the security of the United States, particularly against the guys that want to supplant us as the preeminent power on the planet, the Chinese Communist Party. What strikes me about the Tim Walz thing is that every time we bump into one of these cases, we as a country sort of collectively become aware that there's a spy case, an espionage case, a case that somehow or another touches on that world. Somehow we act like this is the first time we have ever encountered this. And as if we are shocked and also like we don't know anything about this. Oh, this is very surprising. You know, Eric Swalwell, all of a sudden he's sleeping with Fang Ling Ling or whatever her name is, or we find staffers in senators' offices in California, and good Lord, we're shocked to find that the Chinese did this. And again, as if like somehow we're supposed to just pretend that we have collective amnesia. We don't know anything about the Chinese, and we don't know anything about how this business is conducted. Okay, well, you know, we could talk all day about the business of espionage, but just grab a hold of a couple of pieces to tease out a couple of pieces. One of the things we know is that these kind of operations to co-opt and ultimately potentially formally recruit people are conducted in stages, often over very long periods of time, over the course of years. It is not, as I've said recently, typically the case that somebody is simply blackmailed into doing this. And often you are suborned over a period of time. As we used to say in the field, you're pulled down the rabbit hole in stages. Okay, so we also know that the Chinese in particular do this on an industrial scale across the United States. And that since the ultimate goal is to have people in positions of power in DC, that rather than wait until you've made it to the top of the heap and you're a U.S. senator and you've got power and prestige and money and then trying to recruit you, much more productive to target the feeder lines, if you will. And where do all these people come from? The congressmen, the senators, the cabinet officials. They start out as small town mayors. They start out as state legislators. That's when you get your hooks into them. Okay. And then you ride that horse all the way to Washington, D.C. And you recognize that, of course, a bunch of these, you're going to recruit a bunch of mayors that never go beyond being mayors or the state house. And okay, they'll be of marginal utility, but nobody cares because you recruited 50 of them and a handful of them actually made it to Congress and the U.S. Senate. That's the way the game is played. And I don't mean to trivialize it. So now let's look at, Mr. Walz. Well, everything that I just talked about it is right there. I mean, this is a guy who, beginning back when he was apparently sleeping with a Chinese Communist Party's official's daughter during his year in China way back when, has just gotten closer and closer and closer to the Chinese. 30 plus trips to China with students, American students, showing them the wonders of communism, all of this, and I should add, apparently all paid for by the Chinese Communist Party. And another overlay here we should add is there's about 9 million questions that arise when you look at Walz and the CCP. And I think a guy operating in good faith who I guess could just say he was ignorant would answer some of those questions, but Walz, refuses to answer anyone. Where this Homeland Security Committee has gotten to now is that they have identified via whistleblowers that the Department of Homeland Security is in possession of and has been in possession of for some time information that supports all of these concerns that we have. In other words, internally in DHS for some time, the Office of Intel Analysis in DHS and the Homeland Security Investigations Unit within DHS. So these are the guys looking at foreign espionage and U.S. government officials. These guys have been all over this Walz issue for a long time and very concerned about it. And Congress is now saying, we need to see this information that you have, that whistleblowers tell us you have. And of course, true to form, now that we've got a guy who DHS apparently has flagged as potentially being a Chinese spy asset running for vice president, true to form, DHS is stonewalling and refusing to release this information as we go into an election. So to sort of poke DHS, Congress just within the last couple of days released some information of what they have. In other words, saying, just as an example of why we're so worried, guys, for everybody to see in broad daylight, here's an example. And I'll just read this to you shortly. This is a statement made on what amounts to an internal secure group chat within DHS. So these are spy hunters within DHS talking about Walz. And the quote is, "Walz got the VP. You all have no idea how this feeds into what PRC, People's Republic of China, has been doing here with him and local government. It's seriously a line of the intel. Target someone who is perceived they can get to DC," which is exactly what we were just talking about. And these are the guys charged with monitoring this inside DHS, saying, raise the alarm, and now we're being stonewalled.
Sam Faddis, this is a particularly chilling report, especially the information that you've just shared with us about assessments within the relatively small community of counterintelligence officers in our government and the Homeland Security Department, where some of them work, as well as what the Homeland Security Committee in the House is establishing. Again, all of this would seem to be the sort of thing that should be very, very thoroughly shared and debated and understood by the American people before now. Finally, we're going to hear from Colonel Grant Newsom, United States Marine Corps, retired, very distinguished military officer, as well as former Foreign Service officer, or at some point in his career, a defense attaché in Tokyo, as well as a businessman in the region for many years. The author, most recently, of When China Attacks, a book that is a warning to America. We're anxious to get his report on J.D. Vance's record platform staff, if we have any insights into that, and prospective policies towards the CCP. Colonel, welcome back. It's great to have you with us. Thank you for being such a faithful contributor to these programs and member of our committee on the present danger China as well. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Frank. Glad to be here. Now, J.D. Vance is the first candidate I can think of in a long, long time, if ever, who actually really understands how the people who fight America's wars, who pay the taxes, the so-called deplorables, the people in flyover country, actually think. He understands them. Not surprisingly, he's from them. He also understands how many of these people, most of them, feel like that nobody cares. And that's been the case for a long time, and it really was until 2017 and Donald Trump came along. Vance has seen firsthand what's happened to American manufacturing. It's been gutted. Seen the effects that's had on neighborhoods, on societies, and it's been done by Chinese IP theft, unfair trade practices, most of it. He's also seen the drug scourge, that the Chinese origin fentanyl, which was pumped in once there was nothing left in these communities. And fentanyl's killed up towards 1 million people since it really started coming in 2012, 2013. Vance has firsthand experience with all of this, and that shapes his thinking, his attitudes towards the People's Republic of China. He also recognizes, I believe, that we're at war with the PRC. We didn't choose it. They're the ones who will tell you that they're at war with us. He does see Ukraine as something of a distraction, he said, and he says that the real issue is the People's Republic of China. So he's very clear about how he sees it. He's, with his Marine experience, he understands the People's Liberation Army. He's a lawyer. He understands the Chinese use of lawfare and influence. And he, as I noted, he's lived the economic part. He's lived the carnage that his part of America has experienced. But he is about bolstering U.S. alliances. He's not an isolationist at all, though he's accused of it, but rather he understands that our partners, our allies, need to do more for themselves. They need to pitch in. Now, I'm from a generation where it was sort of thought, well, the Americans can do everything. Yeah, we'll just carry everyone else along. He's from a different generation, and they properly understand that we can't do it ourselves, that other countries can't just sit back and let Americans, the Americans from Middletown, Ohio, and that kind of place, go die. Well, they're not willing to send their own young people to do it. And that is what J.D. Vance is about. He understands Taiwan and its importance, though he perhaps, from my perspective, associates it a little too much with their chip industry, the semiconductor industry. There's bigger military operational reasons, political, psychological reasons. But the point is, he does understand Taiwan's importance, and he wants to back it. While he's been a senator, he actually introduced a bill which would have restricted Chinese investment in U.S. capital markets and our exchanges until the Chinese Communist Party starts living by the rules and also the promises they made to follow those rules. And that is an insightful, sort of perspicacious understanding of the People's Republic of China. He's also co-sponsored bills that would get the Chinese out of our education system. He supports tariffs. That's well known. And is that a good thing or not? Well, ask Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping hates tariffs, and every time he meets President Biden, he says so. The fact the Democrats have kept those tariffs going, it's something else. But so Vance is right about that. He said something to the effect that, well, we shouldn't let China make all our stuff, and we should not fight a war with them if we can help it. And that is absolute common sense. And He's the one who said it. He's been far more clearer than most of the faculty at any Ivy League campus put together. Now, in terms of he's got some good staff members. They're not all that well known, but they have a very clear understanding of America, its national interests, and also, once again, Vance's constituency, the deplorables, the people who actually fight the wars and pay the taxes. He's close to people like, apparently, like Josh Hawley, Tom Cotton, Mike Lee, Marco Rubio, Jim Banks, Chip Roy. These are all solid people. One may not agree with everything that they're about, and they don't even agree with each other on everything. But they are people who do share a sense that America is under attack and it needs to defend itself. He's close to Peter Thiel, and who's obviously very wealthy and influential. But I actually had occasion once to speak with Peter Thiel briefly, and I found him very perceptive. We spoke about something involving Japan and how Japan works. And in about 30 years of looking at this issue, I found exactly one person who had spotted that on their own, and it was Peter Thiel. Now, I'd also like to make a word for Steve Bannon, who is close, who has a relationship with J.D. Vance. Well, Bannon has got to be one of the bravest people on the planet. He has what the Marines used to call presence of mind. And Vance, like Bannon, understand and actually give two hoots about these people that I mentioned earlier, the people in flyover country, the deplorables. And like Bannon, Vance has a good understanding of the financial world, Silicon Valley, but they're not of them. And that is a huge difference. I worked for a long time with a Wall Street firm, at a Wall Street firm, actually. And I understand just how rare this is. I would say that at best, there was an indifference towards what you would call regular Americans. And at worst, there was a contempt, the idea being they were just too stupid not to go to Wharton and get an MBA and get a job on Wall Street. Vance and Bannon are very, very different from that crowd. And that's why the crowd doesn't like them so much. Now, I would just finishing up here. Now, the spy balloon that came over America a couple of years ago, you notice that most people looked up and they said, what is going on here? This isn't good. China's a problem. What's going on? Who's going to do something about it? Well, Vance seems like the kind of guy who is going to do something about it and who understands the China threat. Another thing I would note, and just editorializing a bit, is that how often do you hear somebody in Washington say they were wrong about something? Well, Vance has said, I was wrong about Donald Trump. Somebody who will change their mind is somebody that no one will speak well of. So look at the Vice President candidate Vance from China's perspective. Who would you rather have across the table with you, Vance or Waltz? In fact, who would you rather have, Trump or Harris? So that's pretty clear who the Chinese would rather have. I note that J.D. Vance also took on sort of the Republican Party establishment when they tried to finish him off when he ran for senator. And that's the crowd that doesn't want to get China mad, doesn't want to have to take them on. Compared to that lot, I would suspect that J.D. Vance would have an easier time, and Mr. Trump would have an easier time taking on the Chinese compared to parts of the GOP establishment. So it's not all doom and gloom, and America has the ability to turn itself around very quickly on occasion. It just has to get the right people in there, and I think you'll see that things could correct themselves very, very quickly. So thanks for having me today, Frank. Glad to share a few ideas.
Colonel, thank you very much for those important insights and contributions. We're going to conclude the program with a presentation by our friend, Dr. Karen Sigeman, another member of the committee, and the woman who engineered, with the help of many of this and other parts of our team, a really important, what we called it, roadshow, to take information about China, about the war that we're in with the Chinese Communist Party, to the American people, particularly in the swing states, in furtherance of this same idea that's animated this program, namely, the American people have a need to know what is going on with respect to the greatest adversary we have ever faced, the greatest existential threat to freedom, as my old boss Ronald Reagan would put it, that the country has ever known. And she did so with great effect, and the videos of Those programs are available, I believe, at American Freedom Alliance, of which she is the president. She has an interesting background she may talk about in the Cold War as a scientist helping track Soviet submarines. So she knows a thing or two about the threats that we face. And she's been very much a champion when it comes to articulating the one that we're confronting at the moment from the Chinese Communist Party, both in the military arena as well as the panoply of unrestricted warfare techniques they've been waging against us for decades, as I said earlier. We specifically asked Karen to kind of synthesize what we've talked about here, make note of, as she did, I think, the election interference that we've been subjected to and why it is vital that we have a focus on this in the present election season, as well as what we need to do about it. And for that purpose, we're delighted to welcome Karen Sigeman back to the stage here. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Frank. It's great to be with you all. And this is such a crucial topic for a webinar, especially at this point in time. And as you noted, we just concluded our 5-city roadshow we call them swing states, or I'm seeing them increasingly as battleground states. As I listened to today's just amazing array of presentations, I thought what they highlight is kind of 3 things. One is the extent of our vulnerability, and we've been supremely vulnerable. Another one is the extent to which it is being concealed, it is being protected, and the depth of the penetration and the range of arenas in which this penetration has been occurring. We've been talking about enemies from without, but enemies from within. If we just consider our borders, intellectual property, our land, our supply chain, healthcare, fentanyl, all of these are arenas in which we are not only vulnerable, but the people in charge, our leadership is actually playing on the other team. And we had talked before about how important is the Chinese Communist Party to these elections, and how important is it as an issue to be discussed. Well, it's about the most important issue, and I would contend it is not partisan to not want a foreign power having leadership position in my country. It is not partisan to want our nation safe, secure, prosperous. These are not partisan issues. And when we think about it, I had posed this question at our last World War III event. We all know the philosophical query: if a tree falls in the woods but nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And I say that there's an analogous question that one might pose, which is, if you're in a war but nobody knows it, can you still lose? And we have been in a war. The Chinese Communist Party has been waging war against us, as we've all noted, for decades. This has been so determinedly, assiduously concealed from the American people, and yet we have been losing. The hearing of all these amazing speakers talk about the extent to which the DHS refuses to investigate things. Our media, obviously completely silent on all of these issues. Under normal circumstances, all the stories that you all mentioned would be front page news. I think it was George who mentioned the Cuban Missile, George Raisley, who mentioned the Cuban Missile Crisis. The entire country was on tenterhooks as this occurred. I, as Frank noted, played a role in the Cold War. The whole world knew we were in a Cold War. Now you mentioned China, and it is so, with such determination, kept out of the news. When you talk about this, people think you've lost your minds. This is supremely effective. People are completely unaware of what's been going on. But the United States is the antithesis of everything that the Chinese Communist Party believes. And they are the antithesis of everything the United States believes. Our philosophical underpinnings are 180 degrees from theirs. We are a freedom-loving people. They seek, make no mistake, they seek global hegemony. They know it, and those of you here on this webinar know it, but our friends, neighbors, coworkers have no clue. So what we have really before us is a choice. It's not just this path or that path. It's the ordering of the entire planet. We mock about the notion of a new world order. China seeks a new world order with it at the helm. How do they do that? By tamping us down. This election is about whether or not we support China as a global hegemon or whether we keep our place in the world. So there's the world ordering. There's our place in it. There's our representative, our constitutional republic that is already deeply undermined. And a number of you have mentioned the plans of a Kamala Harris. We all know it would happen to the constitutions. It's already happening. We know it would happen under President Trump, a shoring up of our national security and of our constitutional ordering. We know that under President Trump, we would have peace through strength. We know that under President Harris, everything will be brought to bear to weaken the United States, to weaken freedoms on the world stage. This election is a front in that war. We've talked about World War III or World War Xi, as Frank notes, because Xi Jinping is in large part behind all of this. This election is a front in that war. And it's crucial that we be made aware of this. We've heard about the infiltration. We've heard their plan. We've heard about all their intentions. We've heard what they've done before. None of this is conjecture. The words that have been being used today are things like destruction, infiltration, and all violence, kinetic warfare. We know all of this is real. All of this is counter to what we believe as Americans. We do not have to guess. We know. We know. We've talked about the notion of you can't handle the truth, right? From the movie. We can handle the truth. We need to handle the truth. We are worthy of the truth. The American people must know the truth. We need to be able to act in accordance with that worthiness. The media is concealing everything from us. We are here trying to bring that truth. The choice is ours. We either follow the China model or the American model. And personally, I prefer the American model to being subjugated to the Chinese Communist Party. Thank you.
Karen, thank you very much. I think that it's a safe bet that most Americans, if equipped with the kind of factual information that has been presented today, will recognize that a choice between our continued constitutional, representative, accountable, limited government and world government under international elites is a pretty obvious choice in favor of staying the course and rebuilding maybe as needed. But that's for those voters to decide, not for us to tell them. One of the things that has been very much top of mind for the Committee on the Present Danger China from its inception, thanks in no small measure to the work that our colleague Roger Robinson has been doing, is to stop the underwriting of the Chinese Communist Party that has made so much of the malevolence we've just been discussing possible, whether it's the United Front Work Department activities or whether it's their military buildup, the takedown of our economy or anything else. And Karen just touched on the media not telling us the truth. I did want to say a word of thanks, actually, to the Washington Post, which yesterday published a 2,000-word article, mostly drawn from a report from some consultancy called the Long-Term Strategy Group, which had done a project for the Defense Department, and the Defense Department permitted them to share the fruits of it with the Post. But it was about Hainan Island, the prominent naval outpost on the south coast of China, and what has been done elsewhere in the South China Sea to build an immense military infrastructure with everything from ports and airfields and space launch facilities and tunnel for basing submarines that is dug into a mountain, and so much more. To the tune, it's estimated, of some $50 billion of investment. And my surmise is that a fair amount of that has probably come from U.S. investors. Let me just give you one example that comes to mind. There is a Chinese corporation called the China State Shipbuilding Corporation, CSSC. It has two subsidiaries, CSSC Holdings and CSSC Science and Technology. And while the parent company has been sanctioned by the Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, in the Treasury Department, the subsidiaries are still available for investment, and I think are still being traded on Wall Street. In fact, they are in the portfolios of Vanguard, Fidelity, iShares, BlackRock, JP Morgan, Nuveen, Goldman Sachs, and dozens of others. So if you're an American retail investor, or you're in a pension fund or a mutual fund or an exchange traded fund, chances are Wall Street has managed your money in such a way as that it is enabling companies like CSSC to build the capacity of the Chinese People's Liberation Army or People's Liberation Army Navy to kill us. And not just, again, our servicemen and women overseas, but quite possibly us here at home. So I would just invite comment from anybody on the team here as to whether this issue, this underwriting of our immortal enemy, mostly by unwitting American investors as a result of the, I guess, elite capture of Wall Street, is something we ought to be talking about and doing something about pursuant to this election. Any takers?
I would say, Frank, that
Right.
we know for sure that if Kamala Harris is elected, that's going to continue and proceed apace. That everything about her platform, her administration, would be pro-China and would continue the ability for the communist Chinese to extract the wealth of the American people through these kind of investments, which may now add up to, not billions, but trillions of dollars, these analysts believe, could be invested by the United States investor into communist China. If that number is $3 to $5 trillion, that's just a scandal. It makes building that $50 billion, military facility pretty affordable. If you're communist China. With President Trump, that's going to end. Whether it ends day one or sometime very soon into the administration, it is simply nonsensical for the U.S. investor to be betting on the success of communist China in transferring our hard-earned wealth from America to communist China. And so I think you've highlighted it perfectly. And again, this will be a common sense policy reform. And you already see from J.D. Vance some real concerns about that U.S. investment in communist China. He sponsored legislation to deal with that, including communist China's defaulted sovereign debt that they owe to the American citizens. And Senator Vance, in that legislation, pointed out cutting off access to U.S. capital markets as punishment for all their nefarious behavior. And so this is a second Trump administration would really, I believe, heavy up on communist China, especially in this regard.
Thank you, Brian. I do want to emphasize that how this proceeds will depend in part on who Donald Trump entrusts with the execution of these missions. And as I think our committee has observed over the years, Steve Mnuchin, as an example, at Treasury, was a serious problem to Donald Trump executing that. And I do want to commend the president for overriding Steve Mnuchin in particular, on the idea of having U.S. servicemen and women and other government employees have their pension funds pushed into Chinese companies, including ones building weapons to kill them. That was a very important achievement, but it was not without a lot of resistance by personnel he'd employed. Let me ask you, there's been some, I think, important criticisms leveled, it must be said, at Kamala Harris. And just looking quickly at some reporting on her positions on China, I did want to get a comment or two from people. She is reputedly committed to continuing the Biden program of, as she put it, responsibly managing competition with China. She is a co-sponsor of the Uyghur Human Rights Act of 2019. And she and the rest of the Biden administration have, as we all know, been supportive of the tariffs that Donald Trump put into place, perpetuated them, and in fact, I guess, expanded them slightly. Anybody want to comment on those aspects of the Harris platform that I don't think were addressed earlier?
The idea that somehow we responsibly manage this competition with China is a fundamental problem in our approach. When one side is out to kill you, and that's what they say. Read the Chinese press, the English language translations for a week, and find one single thing that's positive about the United States, and I'd be surprised. And you'll find lots of things that talk about us as basically the enemy to be destroyed. And yet you constantly hear this from this administration and previous administrations, even excluding the Trump administration, where this idea is if we're Hertz fighting with Avis for number one in the car rental business. And if that's your approach, you're going to lose. It's particularly if you're up against a ruthless opponent who sees that you don't take him seriously. And, well, he's going to take advantage of you, and you will wind up one day when you just can't move. So it does take a fundamental mindset. And I think one set of candidates now has it, and the other one doesn't. So that is just a fundamental problem with our approach to this.
The comments that were made by Sam in his video about these revelations about Tim Walz, as I understand it, wasn't just sleeping with a daughter of a Chinese party official. He was a very senior Chinese party official at that. The question of compromise starting from that point, I guess, is a concern. But it sounds as though there's a real counterintelligence problem here, that professionals in this space are exercised about. And my head just kind of hurts that practically none of what we've been talking about in the course of the program today have been put before the American people in a concerted way to enable them, again, to make informed decisions about it. A number of you have had experience with the U.S. government, gotten security clearances and so on. Maybe George Racely, I could ask you to take this one. Is there a precedent? I think you referred to, Alger Hiss, but is there a precedent for so comprehensively ignoring counterintelligence concerns, to say nothing of the larger issue of the threat we're facing from the Chinese Communist Party? Well, since the McCarthy era?
Since the McCarthy era, like Diana West has pointed out in her great books, American Betrayal, that there's always been an element in the State Department and many other parts of the US government that have never been cleaned out and continue to cover for our enemies to this very day. It's look, if Tim Walz applied for a job as an inspector for the Department of Agriculture, he wouldn't pass. He'd have no chance. But elected officials are not subject to that same scrutiny at all. So, yeah, I think we're going to have a big reckoning and a big purge of the deep state, which I believe is basically Russia and China, really. And this goes back to the 40s, even the 1920s. It's never been adequately addressed. And we're seeing this right in our faces with two communist candidates running for the White House now, Waltz and Harris. Both come out of the pro-Chinese communist background. Very, very easy to find out. You can find this out on Facebook if you want to. So you're not telling me the CIA doesn't know and the FBI doesn't know. But the trouble is that we have people in our intelligence services and our government who are still working for the enemy, or at least willing to cover for the enemy. Yeah. I think Jeff could add something to that.
Economic engagement with China is national suicide. So why do we allow people to make excuses for it, or to say, well, we're going to manage it? There's no managing it. It's just an excuse to continue it. It has to end. We have to get off this train of engagement with China.
Trevor, just back to you on this. One of the things that you've talked about, notably on the roadshow, in which I think you participated in all 5 of those state visits, and I think on one or more of these programs as well, but just to put it into this context, would you just give us a quick introduction to your idea of amnesty as a means of rooting out the kind of penetration that you've talked about?
Well, I agree with Jeff. Like, trading with China it's like dealing with the mafia or the Nazis. There are certain people you do not deal with, that you'll make some money, but they'll kill your kids. So, look, you got to use this. What we've got is a massive organized crime problem. As you stated, Frank, the CCP is a massive organized crime operation. So how do you deal with that on an infiltration basis? I think the next president has to set up a new intelligence agency that is very vetted, nobody from CIA or FBI, but special forces and sheriff's departments, an untouchable squad, a new intelligence agency to root out foreign infiltration. And then the president would declare an amnesty for, say, 3 months. Every foreign agent in America, whether you're domestic or you're a foreign national, you've got 3 months, to leave the country if you're a foreigner and never come back. And if you're domestic, to come into the new intelligence agency, register your name and spill your guts. Tell us everything you know, who paid you, who you paid, what you stole, who you worked for, all the networks you're aware of. And if you're willing to do that and are honest about it, you'll get amnesty, you'll get immunity from prosecution. You'll never hold an important job again, but you'll be allowed to live out your life, and your punishment will be between you and God. And well, at that time, you'll have so much evidence that those few who will not take the deal and won't come forward, you'll be able to go after and prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. You could have hundreds of thousands of people leaving the country, Chinese nationals, Russian nationals, Cubans, cartel, whatever, and you would have a few thousand people coming forward and say, I did what I did, I'm sorry, this is what I did. And you would have enough evidence to convict those who still remained in the system. And the American public would finally get to understand how deep-seated this problem is, and would support the security measures going forward to make sure this doesn't recur. I think this is how you deal with mafia. This is how the British took out the Thuggee gangs in India in the 19th century. You find low-level informants, you get them to rat on their friends, and you give them amnesty, and you'd only have to end up prosecuting probably a few hundred people, and you'd clean the system right out.
Thank you, Trevor. I think this is such a sensational idea, and it fits right in to what we've really been trying to do with the Committee on the Present Danger of China from day one. Is not just, as they say in Washington, admire the problem, but think about what we can do to address it and correct it. I guess maybe lastly, Karen Sigeman, I specifically want to ask this of you, but anybody else is welcome to comment as well. We've heard from you, I think, among others, that one of the lines of attack that the Chinese Communist Party has been using against us is through these international organizations. Just yesterday, I think, we heard that a man that they picked to be the Director General of the World Health Organization from the obscurity of the Foreign Ministry of Ethiopia is a Maoist by the name of Tedros Ghebreyesus. And I think it was just yesterday that he announced that it's time to act more aggressively against anti-vaxxers. This is a guy who was responsible, I think, substantially in the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, for telling us the Chinese were not responsible for, bringing this disease to us from their weapons laboratory, that wasn't transmissible, that there shouldn't be quarantine, impediments to their bringing it here from Wuhan and so on, as well as a whole host of steps that I think serious medical professionals say were responsible for killing needlessly 1 million people in this country alone, with the lockdowns and the masks and the intubations and so on. So this is an aspect of world government that the Chinese Communist Party is championing. They call it global governance, with Chinese characteristics, by the way. It is being brought to us by their friends, both at the World Health Organization in the person of Tedros, and at the UN in the person of Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General there. Both of them have been given in the past 5 months emergency powers by treaties that the Harris team, Harris Biden team, was championing. And my question, I guess, to the team is this a threat that also needs to be getting a lot more attention at a moment such as this? Whether it's got the Chinese fingerprints all over it, as I think it does, or whether it's simply this idea that elites should run America rather than our own form of government.
Absolutely, this has to be addressed. The more silent they are on an issue, the more important it is, and the more determined they are, because again, the American people, given knowledge and information, do make the right choices. We can handle the truth. We will act in accordance with the truth, which is why they do everything to conceal the truth from us. The United States is one of the most it's the most exceptional nation on earth, and maintaining our sovereignty is fundamental to maintaining the freedoms that we have, that are built in, that are guaranteed by our Constitution. All nations deserve to be sovereign. That's what a nation is. Looking to globalist organizations for one world government to have the power to act and mandate certain things based on what they decide is an emergency. It's completely antithetical to, as I noted, to the world order as it is, the Westphalian world order, the world order where each country is allowed to govern itself, the order certainly where Americans are allowed to vote for our leaders. That we have China at the helm of these is the opposite of comforting. We saw what they did last time. In fact, American Freedom Alliance was about to host a conference in 2020 called the CCP's War on the World. And then we felt the effects of their war on the world when they shut us down. So in every single instance, I think decisions were made under the guise of for our health, right? Which is what all evil totalitarian dictatorships act under, this idea that it's for your own good, it's for your health. Every single decision made was the opposite of what it could have been made, and millions of people died needlessly, and we're still feeling the effects. The idea of giving China or anybody associated with China the reins to the world or to our nation, which is what, as you noted, this was the Biden-Harris were urging this forward. Biden-Harris regime were urging this forward. We're seeing this also around the world with increasing anti-free speech laws and people being imprisoned because of hate speech or whatever, because of supranational organizations taking a stance. All of this is with the assistance or urging of the Biden-Harris regime. So we've got to resecure our sovereignty. The world is a safer place that way. And certainly this idea that these experts should be in charge. Just never, experts. Not ever. Yes, yeah, never. Yeah. No. And it's such a disdain for the American people. Mm-hmm. We were just called garbage.
Yeah.
And that is indicative of the disdain in which they hold us.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately for the world, it's disdain for all people.
That's right.
And one of the things I would just add to this important point, Karen, is that a project that many of you have been involved with us in called the Sovereignty Coalition has observed that what they are intent on doing with these treaties, one in the World Health Organization called amendments to the International Health Regulations. They're not calling it a treaty, but it is. And then there's another one in the offing. They're trying to finish on a pandemic treaty. But the United Nations has just adopted a plan for the future that will, as with the WHO treaties, require both that everybody get digital IDs, which are instruments for establishing something that looks an awful lot like the Chinese social credit system, utter population control, and or censorship mechanisms that look very like the ones that the Biden administration implemented earlier on with the tech corporations helping government snuff, cancel, silence, or otherwise penalize people who, well, as Tedros has just said, are anti-vaxxers or, deniers of his prescribed courses of action. These are the sorts of things that have to be resisted. And if I may just put in a plug, we have a vast audience of people who I want to thank Steve Bannon and his team, Grace, and others at the War Room for plugging us into their Getter and Rumble accounts. Please, if this is of interest to you, if you've benefited from it, if you would like to learn more specifically on this issue of the globalist agenda, we are doing an X Spaces tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, hosted by the great Bill Elmore and Dr. Kat Lindley. And we've got I think a pretty impressive cast of characters participating in that one too. So please join us if you want to learn more. Again, in this moment, when you have a need to know, folks, you have to understand what is going on here to be able to make a decision that will, in fact, serve your interests and I believe those of, well, the American people more broadly, but also the world in this crucial election that is now at hand. I think we'll wrap it at that. We are considerably past our promised end time, but I think this has been an amazing program. Gotten some very good feedback from the chat room and Q&As. And I want to thank our listeners, the audience, this expanded audience, and all those who've made this possible, especially, and I won't go through everybody's names, but this really, really first-rate, all-star team, as I say, of the Committee on the Present Danger China. Learn more about it at presentdangerchina.org and how you can subscribe to every single one of these vital programs going forward. With that, let me just say that at the end of the day, this is also about something else that we haven't touched on. This is a spiritual warfare program being waged by people who are, as we speak, destroying churches, replacing crosses and other icons in churches, Christians, with Xi Jinping's photograph and communist iconography. These are people who are diabolically pursuing the destruction of, I believe, not just America, but Western civilization and the Judeo-Christian foundation upon which it all depends. It must be resisted as such, and I urge you to join me in turning to prayer that the good Lord will help us prevail. God bless you all. Dee, back to you.
Thank you, Frank. A video of this webinar will be posted to presentdangerchina.org within a day or so of the conclusion of our program. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. Join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how CCP captured elites betray the USA. Our webinar notices go out via Substack at substack.com/presentdangerchina. And please follow us on X at CPD China. Thanks for joining us today, and goodbye.